All right. Hello. Welcome, everybody, to another one of our amazing webinars featuring our fantastic People Summit speakers. I'm Robyn Mourning with Scaling Up, and today I have Ken Clark with us, and I'm really excited to learn from Ken all about, well, not all about, because we don't have that much time, but we have about 45 minutes to talk about what is the future of private practice? What's kind of coming down the road over the next 3 to 5 years? What should we expect? What kind of things should we be prepared for? And what are let's get some questions answered about some of the things we're fearing, right? Like, ooh, what's AI going to do to private practice? AI means artificial intelligence. What's the impact of that? What's the impact going to be on large kind of like commercialization of mental health, like Talkspace, BetterHealth, Amazon, things like that? So Ken is going to talk a little bit about all of those things, and trust me, it's probably going to leave you excited, and probably you're going to have a billion questions after that. So this is kind of, we're just going to get on the surface here today. And if you have big burning questions, please come to the summit in June, where Ken will be presenting in more depth about several different things related to private practice and culture building within your business, all of those things. So, and you can always send us an email and we will forward your questions to Ken, and as he has time and capacity, he'll respond to you. So, all right, I think that's it. If anyone has anything that they need to express before we get started in terms of tech, if you're having a problem hearing or seeing us, let me know. I'm just going to pin myself, and I'm going to pin Ken. All right, so here we go. Hi, Ken. Thank you so much for being here. I muted you, sorry.
Unmuted. There you go. Thank you for having me.
Yes, please take a few moments to introduce yourself to our audience. There might be some folks familiar with you, but I'm guessing we have some new folks as well. So please take a few moments, let us know who you are, what you're up to, and all of those things.
So I'm Ken Clark, he, him pronouns. I am based in Little Rock, Arkansas. I've been a marriage and family therapist for about 15 years. Prior to that, I spent some time in youth work. But my career straight out of college and what I originally trained for as a young adult was business and finance. Worked in and around Wall Street, did a lot of sector analysis, investment management stuff. So I was kind of like this finance guy that wandered into therapy as a midlife career change. I cut my teeth and did my education in Southern California. We moved to Little Rock, Arkansas in 2008. To start what was supposed to be a solo practice and just take it easy and not be a workaholic. We moved here because it was the highest number of divorces and the least number of marriage therapists that I could find in the country for any metro area. So if you're looking for a place, that's I'm a numbers guy, right? So where's there a high demand for marriage therapy? Especially probably progressive marriage therapy. It's probably in the Mid-South. So moved here in 2008, chickened out on taking the licensing exam like twice. So I didn't start my practice until 2010, taught some college, started a practice in 2010, no ambitions of being a group practice or anything like that. Kept running into like-minded people that were refugees from lousy, toxic places to work, who we just started letting use the therapy room that I was renting when I wasn't using it. Why don't you help me pay the rent kind of thing? And before long, there was 5, 6, 7 of us, different specialties. Fast forward 15, 10, 12 years later, we are 200 clinicians across 22 offices in Arkansas, one in Dallas, Texas. We serve up about 22 to 2,500 sessions a week in mental health. We run like a collective. We are very clinician and staff focused. Over 90% of our revenue goes back out to clinicians somehow, and admin staff and direct compensation. So we're a very low profit margin practice. It feels like a nonprofit some days. But we do all kinds. We're multidisciplinary. So we got everything from play therapy to med management, right? So we kind of do it all. As part of that, the business nerd in me, which I was a business nerd before I was a therapy nerd, the business nerd in me is continued to wrestle with what does it look like to lead a growing practice in a changing environment and an uneven landscape. And so that's a lot of what I do is what author Jim Collins would call productive paranoia. I just kind of lay there in bed at night and wonder how things are going to change and all that. One of the mottos in our company is expect the death of your current model. So however you think you're doing it, it's going to change. It always has, right? Even in our field, it's changed so much every 3 to 5 years, right? So looking at that, looking at the landscape, looking at the huge commercialization of mental health and how the world is trying to go into the mental health business, that leads me to some conclusions that are probably relevant, definitely relevant for my practice and my folks, probably relevant for you. So that's what we'll talk through a little bit today. If you like more of this, please come to the conference. It's a great conference. I'll be speaking on culture there and how to build cultures that people want to be part of within companies. You can also find me on semiprivatepractice.com. I hold a weekly coffee with Ken, one for group practice owners, one for solo practice owners on Thursdays. So I'll tell you the big 2 or 3 things, and then we'll see what questions Robyn has, and she can kind of facilitate the discussion. To me, there's like 2 kind of intersecting lines that I look at when you're thinking about how does the changing world affect your practice, whether you're a solo practitioner, group practice, agency leadership, whatever. There's the broad economic piece, right? All of our businesses, organizations exist in an economy, and as that economy rises and falls, it probably has an impact on us. And then there's our changing industry, right? As our industry evolves, as people come into the industry, try and monetize the industry, that has an impact as well. So broadly, I would point out that we have been in what is a prolonged economic expansion as an economy. Even the COVID hiccup didn't really hiccup that hard. That really, it's been a runaway economy in a good way since about 2008, when the world imploded with that last mortgage crisis and all that. Before that, it was a good economy since about 2000. Before that, it was a good economy since about 1988. What that means is that every 8 to 12 years, going back the last 200 years, the economy goes through recession and contraction and all that kind of stuff. And that's something that you need to prepare for if you're in leadership or if you're managing a small business, right? That every 8 to 12 years, it's going to get rocky for a little while. And that's part of how economies work. We're overdue, right? And most of the economists that, if you listen to them, follow them, they're calling for a recession, a contraction of the economy, a job market getting a little rougher for our clients, things like that, somewhere around 2025, 2026. So the awesome economy we've seen, you'll see it begin to drop off in 2025, 2026. The big economic think tank that I personally follow and put a lot of credence in, it's called ITR Economics out of Dallas. They are also calling for a depression that rivals what we saw in the 1930s, somewhere around 2030. So we're going to see really the worst economy in 100 years, somewhere around 2030. That will be a combination of national debt coming due, student loan crisis, inflation, all these things, right? So those are out there on the horizon. The world will keep spinning, but that will be a rough time for some practices, particularly practices that rely mostly on cash pay clients or affluent clients, things like that. Those are all people that tighten up their spending when the economy gets bad. So broadly, I would tell you the next 10 years have a couple rocky points in them. They're not reasons that you should quit private practice or close up an agency or a nonprofit, but they're things you need to prepare for, namely by making sure you got some cash reserves in the bank, making sure that you aren't overcommitted as far as big fixed expenses. Probably not the right time to expand, triple, quadruple your office space before you have therapists to fill it up or anything like that. Within our industry, probably the big thing that I get asked about a lot is how are these huge kind of corporate conglomerate entities going to affect what we do. I think we all have our sentimental, cynical view that, you know, texting with somebody about your mental health just can't replace sitting in a room and building a relationship and rapport and all that. I agree with that 100%. I don't think that individual face-to-face or even telemedicine will get replaced by these huge low-cost providers. What I do think it'll do is it'll take some of the growth in the market away from us. So we will see our experience remain fairly stable, but you'll still see a lot of people that'll be their first use of mental health is Talkspace or BetterHelp or something like that. Because of that, they may wander into our practices someday. They may decide that they want to try face-to-face, but a lot of people like the anonymity of all that. I do think those entities will be they're in their heyday right now. They're in their glory days, in part because a lot of them are funded by venture capital and private equity money. So they don't really care what they pay therapists. They can overpay therapists even relative to what they collect. They're not too worried about HIPAA and some of these things that a lot of us think about. And so I think there's a reckoning coming for those companies as far as their ability to provide services in an ethical way, in a way that has high quality therapists. So I tell people the bigger thing that you need to be concerned about if you're watching the horizon for how trends are going to impact us is what we call the big four or the big five, right? So Apple, Google, Walmart, some of these Amazon, these absolutely large companies. You put the top 4 or 5 high-tech employers together, brick and mortar employers together, and they've got 6 to 8 million employees, depending on how you count those companies. That's more than a lot of states, right? I live in a state where there's like 3 million people. So those big 4 companies combined have more employees than Arkansas, Delaware, and than Wyoming and a few other states put together. So when they decide that mental health is something that they want to either do better at because of their own employees and or monetize to the public, that's where a lot of our real competition is going to come into our space. And we're already seeing it, right? Walgreens and CVS are now placing therapists in location. And you can walk into a CVS and get your prescription, get some deodorant and toilet paper, and see your therapist. And that gives them a different revenue model than us, right? They can pay the therapist a little more because they know that the average person, every time they come in, buys $42 worth of stuff, right? Walmart is experimenting in Texas. They've got, I think, 4 or 5 locations now where, just like they used to have optometrists there, they now have licensed clinical social workers on site, and you can see them for $50 a session. Again, their model's different, right? They know that while husband is in there getting therapy or wife's in there getting therapy, that spouse, significant other, or kids will walk around and spend money. So for them, it's a little different economic model, and that's why they don't need to charge as much, and they can still pay their clinicians a lot. My big fear, like them or not, I know we all probably have some love-hate with Amazon, right? It's the easiest thing to order, but we're also part of the problem when we do it. Amazon will be the one that will be an absolute game changer, because what's going to happen is when Robyn goes to Amazon to buy a book about depression, seasonal affective disorder, something that matters to her, that's on her radar, that she's experiencing, what you'll begin seeing is right next to that book that you're looking at, it'll say, would you like to talk to a therapist right now? And it will be somebody who's embedded with Amazon, and because of your Amazon Prime account, you get a discount. That's what's going to happen is the Amazons, the Apples, these companies are, over the next 5 to 10 years, they're going to buy up the BetterHelps, the Talkspaces, some of these large providers that we're seeing, Lyra, all that kind of stuff. And they're going to use it as their own kind of plug and play. We offer mental health now. So that's one of the big changes we see coming is people will decide to try a new therapist or try therapy because it'll be co-branded, co-marketed with a lot of these huge companies that have really deep pockets and have big footprints. The other big thing that I see coming on the radar that is going to impact us broadly is the greater adoption of artificial intelligence, especially on the note auditing side. So if you're doing any work with insurance, with Medicaid, with Medicare, any of these providers, right? We all fear the audit. We all fear somebody coming in and saying you didn't use an Oxford comma, so we're taking all the money back or whatever. That won't really be the problem. It happens very rarely, honestly. But because of what's called the open notes requirement, which was part of an act that was put in place a few years ago that requires within a few years, all your clients will be able to see their notes on their phone by the end of the day. That's going to be the requirement in the next few years. Because of that, that will also open up access to the insurance companies to all those notes. You are obligated under your contract, whether you want to believe it or not, to give them access to that documentation. What will happen is they will begin auditing every note in real time using artificial intelligence, looking for keywords like are you using the word couple or marriage a bunch when you're doing a 90837, when you're doing an individual therapy code. They'll flag those for review, and then it'll go live human, and you'll literally get notices within a day or two saying, hey, this session doesn't look accurate. Please provide more information or recode it or whatever. So I think that will have a huge impact on how a lot of us practice. It'll require more and more focus on notes and evidence-based protocols, built-in measures. You'll have to prove that clients are doing better or worse, things like that. The other big trend I see on the payer side, especially on private insurance. So if you're taking Blue Cross or Ambetter or Cigna or any of these, you will see rates go to right at 100 or below $100 per session for an hour of therapy if you're not already there. And you will begin seeing a limit on the number of sessions. So right now, a lot of places, you can see clients 50 times a year, and you hope you don't get audited, but it's kind of a roll of the dice, and you hope for the best. I think within 2 to 3 years, they'll say, just like a lot of other medical procedures, you can't do this without pre-authorization. So you'll begin seeing things like you can see somebody 8 times or 12 times. After that, it requires a pre-authorization for more sessions, which will require you as therapists, as organizations, as private practices to have a larger pool of clients you're pulling from, because you won't be able to see your clients as much under those insurance plans. So we see a lot of pressure coming there, right? There will be a whole crop of therapists who never know anything different than that, right? They'll graduate from grad school, they'll go into that environment, and they won't see it as the travesty that we see it, right? It'll just be their new normal. But that's what's coming for the environment. And I think one of the big things that all of us need to do is figure out what does that look like for us to pivot and to embrace those changes. I am all for advocacy. I am all for signing petitions. I'm all for whatever. Here's the truth. Blue Cross Blue Shield does not care what you think of what they pay you, right? Especially in a lot of states where they're turning away providers from being on their panels. And if you don't like it and you leave, they'll just let somebody else on the panel in your place. So we can advocate, we can do all that. But I will tell you, as a business person and a finance guy, and looking at how this has gone down in other aspects of the healthcare industry, because this is what happened to primary care about 15, 20 years ago, it's coming for us, and you kind of got to buckle in. So all that to say, I also think that demand for mental health and the acceptance and use of it is going to probably quadruple, quintuple over the next 20 years. So we're going to see tighter constraints on how we operate, but more clients than ever. I don't expect wait lists to go away. A lot of practices I know are running wait lists, and they're having to turn people away, and the therapists are burnt out because they're trying to get everybody in. I don't see that changing, right? So it's this weird kind of both and, like, the environment's going to get harder to operate in, and yet there's going to be more people than ever that need your help. So I'll stop there and take a breath. Robyn or anybody else, any questions about that initial vomit of information?
I'll just say, I know now why you lay awake paranoid at night, because that was a lot. I mean, some of this is new to me and some of it's not. I'm sure a lot of us here are, hearing bits and pieces of different things, and a lot of us can feel some anxiety and panic and fear. And what do we do now to kind of prep ourselves and not get too caught up in the I'm gonna swear now. Holy shit, what do I do? I'm freaking out. How do I make sure my family and I are taken care of during the, in 10 years when things are projected, right, to get tougher. So I appreciate you speaking to all these things. I think it's really important that we be aware of kind of what's projected to happen in the future. And I think you are absolutely right in that these changes already happened to primary care a decade and a half ago or so. And so it's only a matter of time that big changes come to the way mental health care is managed under a medical model, which is where mental health is. Like it or not, that's where it is. So One thing that you spoke about at the end, you kind of brought it in a tiny bit, but I had this question. Okay, I think a lot about intersectionalities and how different events interact with one another. So like you said, we're going to see most likely an economic challenge of some kind 1 to 2 times over the next decade. So that, along with the fallout, the mental health fallout of a 2 to 3 to 4 year pandemic, right? We don't know how long we're going to be in this pandemic. There's a fallout with that, right? There's lots of grief and loss that we're all holding for various reasons, to various degrees. This was a really stressful time for a lot of us. It really brought out of the woodworks for some folks, and for other people, it really highlighted or made the impact even worse, how different inequities were just exacerbated during the last couple of years.
Yep.
So there's a lot of people, and we have however many millions of people with long COVID, right? So we have a mass disabling event that impacts mental health of everyone involved. And that's just talking about one thing that happened over the last few years that's stressing us out and impacting our mental health as providers and people. So I think about that, and I think about what you said about how there will be an increase in the amount of people seeking mental health services, while also we're going to have economic challenges, as well as some, I'll call them competitor challenges that are obviously part of economic challenges. So when we think about that, I think about, first of all, I need to take a deep breath, right? I need space in my body to hold it, and then I need to let some stuff go so I can actually hold it. So I think about, all right, we have to be creative about how we set ourselves up now, right, to weather those future storms. And how we set ourselves up is one thing, but how do we operate as a community to support all of us setting ourselves up, right? Because there are marginalized therapists that experience a lot of oppression systemically and individually, that will need extra support and help in setting themselves up and their families up for, the resilience needed to weather these storms. So I think about, from a community aspect, so I'm curious about your thoughts there. And then also, what are some ideas that you have for us to kind of hold both scenarios? There's going to be a lot of people wanting access to us, and also it's going to be harder for us to access them in the way that they need, while meeting our needs and such. So those kind of are my two questions / curiosities of what you would have to say. And then after that, I'll kind of read a couple of questions that I see in the chat.
So I'll start by recommending a documentary that, after a decade of my wife writing my tale to watch, that I finally watched with her, and it was so effing good. It's called I Am by Tom Shadyac. He's the person who directed like Bruce Almighty and Ace Ventura and Patch Adams and a bunch of those things. And it's a spectacular documentary that emerged from him having like a TBI and studying, and he was super suicidal out of that, and trying to figure out what message he wanted to leave behind. I think maybe in anticipation of ending his own life. And so he made this documentary, and it ends up being, this is a decade ago, and they're talking about the vagus nerve in that before we were all talking about polyvagal theory and things like that. It's really fascinating. The punchline of it is the interconnectivity of all creatures, how a flock of birds changes direction at the same time without sending emails. Like, how do they know to do that, right? And the interconnectivity of humans, and how capitalism in particular has created a me first attitude and pulled us away from communal resourcing and put us in a scarcity mindset. So everything I'm going to say is probably in this vein of the short answer is that individualism is probably part of our problem, right? That even what walks into our office so often I see as simply, in a lot of ways, the outpouring or the outgrowth of a lack of community, right? Alone is the worst human condition there is, whether you're literally alone or alone in a room. A lot of probably what walks into our office would not walk into our office if it had greater communal connections, right? So I think on two levels, right? One, from a how do we meet this demand point of view, I think group therapy is going to become more and more important, not because group therapy is a good model by itself, and there's empirical reasons why group is really cool, but because in general, humans are dying for connection, right? And the reality is, I mean, we've run groups here, though you kind of roll your eyes at it from an ethical point of view and you cringe. The fact that you hear that a bunch of people in the group went on vacation together or something, you're like, oh, that terrifies me. And yay that all of you walked in here alone and then decided to do a road trip together after 8 weeks. Don't tell me about it, but yay, you know. So I think that practices that lean into group, not just as a way of meeting the need, but embracing how we're designed and what we need and what is wrong with the world in so many ways right now. I think that's going to be a big part of the solution. And I think people are longing for it. I think they're terrified of it. I think it's the stigma of mental health is still there in the sense that we feel okay sitting in a room with a therapist, but not other people who might know our stuff that we might bump into around town. And so I think our field's got to lead the way in group being not just a therapeutic thing, but an experiential, existential healing of people. That applies to us as a community of providers as well, right? That in the end, we need to be in the same space more, right? The biggest single thing I hear out of these weekly coffees I run, I mean, I literally like have a thank you card sitting on the floor that I just got from somebody in one of the groups saying, it's just nice to have a place and that we come and we talk about marketing some, and then we just talk about how scared we are, right? Like we like it, like I'm not the only one. And by the way, the guy running the $12 million a year practice is terrified half the time as well, right? Like, and if you're scared, then maybe it's okay for me to be scared, you know. So that same interconnectivity among us as providers, not just in sharing ideas, but clasping hands and saying, if this is the end of the world, we'll do it together, right? Like we'll all say F it and go get a job at McDonald's together, you know, or move to the Bahamas and, you know, work at a hotel together if this industry fails. Like that's needed, right? That there's so much that's tolerable when we're not, it's made me cry, when we're not alone, right? And our field right now still places a really high value on do this and don't admit that you need help or that you're scared or that you're confused. Even though most of us never had any business training, any leadership training to speak of, there's this whole like boss babe, boss dude mentality of like, I got this. And I'm sitting there going, why the F would you have this? Like, how would you possibly know to run a business and you're going to pretend like you know what you're doing? You know, I don't know what I'm doing. And I've been doing this for 15 years. So I think that's a big part of it, Robyn, is that we have to encourage this interconnectivity and vulnerability among entrepreneurs and leaders that makes it safe to not know, to not have answers, to not be able to predict the future. Otherwise, we're not going to survive it. We're going to live in our amygdalas, and that limits our options that we see to solve problems, and it increases our reactivity. So that's a big part of it. Is we've got to do that. That's also how, I mean, like I'm the cisgendered white dude who was raised by a business guy who was raised by a business guy. I have a stupid unfair advantage, right? And the only way that a lot of folks are going to get the knowledge they need is for us to share space. So when you talk about intersectionality and how do we lift up other people and focus on equity within the entrepreneurial and leadership space, it's the people who are 2 or 3 steps ahead being open books, so that everybody else can learn and have some advantage there as well. Not to say that those entrepreneurs and leaders aren't gritty and badass and amazing and brave, but there's things that I knew at 12 because my dad made me run lemonade stands that if you've never run a business, you don't know until somebody tells you. So I think that's got to be part of it, that the folks in power have to be not afraid of losing it, not afraid of giving away the secret sauce. Otherwise, the disadvantage always stays. And that happens in groups. Yeah. That happens in conversations like this.
Yes, thank you so much. Community is my favorite answer to anything. So I think you spoke about the documentary and the birds, and how they're flocking together and change direction. And I think about concepts of biomimicry and murmuration, which is what birds are doing, murmuration. And then I think a lot about emergent strategy, which is a crucial framework for me. It's a framework that was kind of birthed originally in this current form by Adrienne Marie Brown. And it's a concept that has driven me a lot. In terms of working towards liberatory relationship, liberatory healership, what does anti-oppressive mental health look like? All of these concepts, what does this look like in real life, in the context of actual relationships with people, and then humanizing these systems, right, that we operate on. And I think about interdependence. You use the words interconnectivity and vulnerability, which to me is very synonymous and part of interdependence. And in a late stage or end stage capitalist society, these are some of the things that we see, in this increased pressure to be individualistic and to compete, while also feeling the contrast of the need to be connected, to feel human again with other people, and to really feel in the body what it's like to be within ourselves and sharing space with other people. And then bringing about this idea and practice of sharing power and sharing resources in ways that probably none of us actually know what that feels like long term, outside of the colonial project. So I really appreciate that perspective. I feel more grounded, and knowing that there's so many of us that want this, so many mental health professionals, so many people, right? Like, let's take our labels away. There's so many people that want connection and want support, and to hear that I am scared too, right? And we can do this together. I don't know if you all saw the movie Don't Look Up, but I highly recommend that movie. It is awesome. It's hilarious. And it's also like, oh my God, it's like present day. Like, this is a documentary of our life right now. But this idea,
it was terrifying because of the attitudes in it. Like, it was it mimicked the world we're living in so much. That was the scariest part of it.
Exactly. Yes. So coming together, connecting with one another, and being vulnerable, which is so hard, not going to be flippant about that, is really hard to do, especially when we're not used to being vulnerable in a community setting without it kind of biting us in the butt, right? Because we're just not well practiced in that communal way of living anymore. So thank you for that. I want to make sure we have time to get to a couple of the questions.
And I want to summarize, because it summarizes in my head, not because you didn't do a good job of it. In an individualistic capitalistic society, the point of connection is accomplishment.
Yes.
Right. I'm in these peer advisory groups of other business owners, and what everybody does when they come in and joins these groups is it's all chest puffing. They want to compare revenue. They want to compare head count. They want to compare, so in an individual society, that's how we connect. In a more collectivistic, interdependent society, we connect over where we're failing and where we struggle. And so they're polar opposites, right? Like, an individualistic society, I don't know, can foster that connection when the point of connection is itself bragging, right? Like, here's how I'm better than you, right? And by the way, it's probably all bullshit, but because I'm terrified on the inside.
Yep.
We need more hot mess leaders. And whether you're that's a leader in a household or a leader in a relationship or a leader in a company, but we need people that are hot messes to admit that they are so. That's where it starts. Leader means you go first, right? You're the front of the line, so you got to be first on accountability.
Yes, thank you for that. I had a question from someone who direct messaged me asking about the limits. So you talked about, I think this question came in when you were talking about the limits to the amount of sessions and then the pre-auths and stuff like that. And the question was, isn't that the opposite of what the ACA did?
Yeah, sort of. So, nothing in the ACA prevents blanket requirements on utilization, right? So You can't just decide you're going to get a $500,000 kidney transplant, right? Like that somewhere in there, they have the right to also set limits on utilization as long as they can demonstrate parity, right? That they're not treating mental health any different, and that it's not discriminatory. In other words, we're redlining this zip code and everybody there gets less mental health. So I'm this really weird creature in the sense that I wrote an insurance textbook before I was a therapist, right? So I kind of nerd out on insurance. Insurance companies aren't the evil entity in my mind that most people make them out to be, but they're also systemically broken. The reality is that insurance in general has a problem that it has to solve for, which is it can't pay out more money than it brings in, right? Like in the end, insurance is based on risk pooling. So all of us on the call pay money into an insurance plan. That's where they pay for mental health and ingrown toenails and COVID tests. And so if ultimately there's more costs going out than coming in, one of two things has to happen. They either need to lower the costs or raise the premiums. Like in the end, there's some math there that's unavoidable. And insurance companies are up against this, right? And we need to recognize what they're up against and figure out maybe even how to be partners in this, which is 10 years ago, only a small portion of their plan was getting therapy if it was even covered. And now people that are discovering therapy, and especially with things like complex trauma, they're needing weekly therapy every week for 2 years, right? And the model hasn't built that price in to what the consumer is charged, right? I know we think they make an absolute ton of money, and they do compared to us, but that we're facing that. And so the insurance companies, even under ACA, are given latitude to make sure they don't go out of business, right? ACA, the Affordable Care Act, requires them to make mental health accessible and increase parity and things like that. But it's also written so that it's not going to put any insurance company out of business. And that's what's going to be utilized to put those limits in place. Is you'll get blanket limits across plans that says this is not an unlimited open checkbook, that we give everybody this and then we do this to control costs or whatever. And so I think those limits are not contradictory to ACA, but they're going to be exploited by insurance companies, not with the consumer in mind, but with keeping at least a net profit happening. So the other places you'll see it, there's other aspects of it. You'll see stuff like Walmart, right? We're in the state where Walmart's headquartered. You'll see preferential treatment or costs that go with certain providers. So something like Teladoc, right? If you use Teladoc, which we've got an agreement with Teladoc to make sure they don't overutilize or whatever, we'll waive your copay. So we give you even better care if you're willing to use a certain provider. We don't harm you if you're not, but we'll make it cheaper for you to use certain providers. So you'll see things creep into plans like that pull the consumer away from us, especially solo practitioners, because we're not part of those bigger platforms. But I don't see those limits not happening. And again, ACA, its scope is more limited than people think.
Yeah.
In my experience.
Yeah. Okay. I do. So it looks like Maria in the chat, we answered your question. I'm glad you have a follow-up. Do you think unions can make the value of collectivity concrete for the field and resist some of the trends or the impacts of the trends?
Yes and no. I think there's always power in numbers, right? I'll be cynical. There's also poor decision making in numbers. I go back to no, it wasn't Zimbardo. It was the one who did the electrocution experiment back in the day before there was ethics about that. One of his big conclusions, right? Milgram. It was Milgram, I think. So Milgram did a study where he had somebody lay down on a sidewalk and pretend like they're passed out. And when an individual would pass by, almost always the individual would stop and help. But when crowds would pass by or groups of people, nobody would stop, right? So there's this weird thing that happens to personal responsibility as well in groups, right? The one downside, and I'm all for unionization. The one downside is people then often defer their own personal responsibility to the entity. So I think there's some power in that. I will tell you, the lobbyists in our industry suck, right? Like, so if I really look at where the failing is, it's that the ACA or the AMFT or the APA or whatever, They've got one lobbyist and they're not doing a great job, kind of thing. We need better lobbyists. We need better explanation in front of congressional bodies and state bodies about what needs to happen to protect the care we provide. And I think that's doable, and that's where unionization will drive some of that. It's not so much in the ability to fix prices, because that's actually illegal, right? Like if a bunch of therapists get together and say, we all refuse to accept less than $125 a session, that's actually monopolistic behavior and runs afoul of Federal Trade Commission regulations. So we can't do that. All we can really do is pay lobbyists to make a bigger dent there. The problem that we're all going to face as well, like I said, with new therapists coming into the market, is because this is a booming field, it's also going to be, it's going to boom as far as number of people that decide this is a viable career, right? As other industries die, we're going to get people that move into this. You see this with law degrees and MBAs. You go back to the early 80s, getting a law degree or an MBA was like a guaranteed meal ticket, right? Now there's so many MBAs, it's worthless a lot of times. My son wants to be a lawyer. Every lawyer I put him in front of is like, don't do it, dude. Like it's so different than 20 years ago. You're lucky if you make 60 grand a year and you got $250,000 in debt. So what's going to happen to our industry is there is going to be a flood of graduates that are coming in faster than people are leaving our industry. And those flood of graduates will be less prone to unionize. They'll be more prone to take whatever job they can get the first time, et cetera. And so I think that's going to create some pressure that the insurance companies can work around or utilize, right? Like, okay, Robyn and Ken don't want to accept Blue Cross anymore. We're going to open it up to provisionally licensed people and pay them less, and they're happy to do it. So I think we should do it. We should absolutely do it. I don't think it'll fix it at a macro level.
Yeah, agreed. Agree that having something, and right now the union is the thing I think that we most easily reach for, right? Like, oh, that we know what that is. We know what a union is. Let's do that. And I encourage people to also get creative at scaling up. We always talk about think outside the box, right? There's unionizing, that's an option. There are pros, cons, benefits, all things that are restrictive, all the things, right? And so then I think about what's another way that we can gather together, pool resources, right? And I think about models around different economic models. And what is out there, what has worked in various places, where can we look to form and do things differently, right? So I work a lot with businesses and organizations and folks and think about what is a worker-owned co-op model? How does that fit into a generative economy? What if we were to participate in participatory budgeting with our literal neighborhood, right? And pooling, like there's so many different ways that we can come together and figure this out as we go, taking a lot of the knowledge that we all have over the years and, coming together and figuring it out, problem solving. So thank you so much. We're at time. So we could definitely talk for several more hours, I'm sure, but we all have to go. Before we go, thank you everyone who joined us live today. As I said before, feel free to send us any questions that might pop up over the next couple of days as you've been letting this sink in and percolate. Feel free to send an email to us and we'll make sure that Ken gets it. Also, before you go, I want to just remind you of the Be Bold Summit that is taking place in Denver. We have in-person and virtual options available for you to participate. If you're not able to join us in person for whatever the reason, you can sign up for our live stream. Right now, through the end of April, we have an early bird discount of $397. But for the next 3 days, for all of us who came live today or registered and watched the replay, will get a discount. So instead of $397, it'll be $217 for the next 3 days. You're going to get all of that in an email. And I'll also put the link here to register. So if you want to snag this link right now, go ahead. Let me see. Okay, I can't talk and type at the same time anymore. It just doesn't happen. So there you go. Right. Ken, thank you so much for sharing time, space, and wisdom with us today. Is there anything that you want to say before we close out?
let's continue the discussion, and both, if you have ideas or accountability or things I need to hear, if I stuck my foot in my mouth, openness is the highest human characteristic there is, I believe. So whether it's me or anybody else, please keep speaking up, speaking your minds, contesting the status quo. That's the only way that we wrestle with what different looks like.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Great reminder. Will there be in person from Albuquerque? Oh, you're gonna be there, Susan. Woohoo! Great. Yes. Can't wait to see you in person or virtually at the Be Bold Summit. We'll talk to you all soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me.